I spent 3 years building the digital marketing division from scratch. I worked weekends while everyone else was at barbecues. I missed family dinners, skipped my sister's wedding rehearsal, and canceled vacation plans twice. I stayed late analyzing data when the office was empty and silent. I brought in clients no one else could reach. I increased our revenue by 40% in 18 months. But none of that mattered when my boss found out I was gay. It happened during the quarterly meeting in front of the entire senior team. Someone made a joke about my weekend plans with another man. My boss, Richard, laughed loudest and said maybe that explained why I was so good at social media, like it was some kind of stereotype. The room went silent. 20 people stared at their notebooks. No one defended me. Not one person. I thought hard work would be enough. I'd built campaigns that won industry awards. But when Richard discovered I was dating a man, everything changed. He started making comments about my clothes being too fashionable. He questioned my ability to relate to our mainstream clients. The last straw came during a presentation when he openly mocked my voice in front of investors. My story will touch you. If you have ever been or felt judged just for being who you are, or know someone who went through this, you will identify and want to follow along because the ending is impactful. Subscribe to this channel and help give voice to stories that should no longer remain silent. My name is Marcus, and I have worked in marketing for 12 years. I started at the bottom as a junior coordinator at a small agency in Chicago. I learned everything by asking questions and staying late to watch the senior team work. When I moved to Denver 5 years ago, I joined Beacon Media Group as a digital strategist. The company focused on mid-sized retail brands trying to expand online. I was good at my job because I paid attention to details others ignored. The office sat on the 15th floor of a glass building downtown. Large windows overlooked the mountains. Most days, I arrived at 7 in the morning before anyone else. I made coffee in the small kitchen and reviewed campaign analytics while the city woke up below. By 8, the floor filled with account managers, designers, and copywriters. Everyone was friendly in that surface way coworkers are. They asked about my weekend and shared photos of their kids. But something always felt slightly off. I noticed it in small moments. When I mentioned going to a concert, someone asked if I went alone. When I dressed nicely, a colleague joked that I looked like I was going to a fashion show instead of the office. During lunch conversations about dating, the questions directed at me were always vague. People assumed I had a girlfriend, and I never corrected them. It felt easier to let them believe what they wanted. My direct supervisor was a woman named Patricia who managed the entire digital department. She appreciated my work ethic and gave me bigger accounts as I proved myself. Within 2 years, I was handling our largest clients and training new hires. But Patricia reported to Richard, the vice president of client services. Richard had been with the company for 5 years and ran the department like his personal kingdom. He was in his mid-50s with gray hair and an expensive watch collection. He spoke loudly in meetings and interrupted people constantly. Richard tolerated me because my campaigns made money. But I sensed he disliked something about me that he could not name. He never invited me to the golf outings he organized for senior team members. When the department celebrated wins with drinks after work, he directed conversations away from me. During performance reviews, he praised my results, but always added comments about needing to be more assertive or developing executive presence. I was never sure what he meant. My personal life existed in a separate world. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, the neighborhood where I could walk to coffee shops and restaurants without feeling watched. 6 months after moving to Denver, I met someone named Alex at a fundraiser for an LGBTQ community center. He worked as an architect and had moved from Seattle the year before. We started dating slowly, meeting for dinners and hiking on weekends. Alex was patient with my hesitation to be public about our relationship. He understood the fear that came with being visible. For a long time, I kept my work life and personal life completely separate. No one at the office knew about Alex. When colleagues asked about my weekend, I gave generic answers about going to museums or watching movies. I removed any hints of my identity from social media and kept my profiles private. The hiding exhausted me, but it felt necessary. I had watched other people get sidelined in their careers after coming out. Opportunities disappeared. Promotions went to less qualified people. I could not risk it. Then something changed. The company landed a major client, a national outdoor gear retailer looking to completely rebuild their digital presence. The contract was worth $8 million over 3 years. Patricia assigned the account to me because of my experience with e-commerce brands. I spent months developing the strategy, hiring specialists, and building a dedicated team. The client loved everything we presented. Their sales increased 35% in the first quarter after launch. Industry publications wrote articles about the campaign. We won 2 awards at a regional marketing conference. Richard took credit during investor calls. He presented the work as his vision, even though he had barely reviewed any of it. I sat in those meetings listening to him describe strategies I had created. Patricia told me to be patient, that recognition would come. But it never did. Instead, Richard started treating me like a resource instead of a person. He assigned me impossible deadlines and expected me to work around the clock. When I delivered, he moved on to the next demand without acknowledgement. Around this time, my relationship with Alex deepened. We had been together for almost 2 years and decided to move in together. Finding an apartment was exciting, but also terrifying. We would be living openly as a couple. Neighbors would see us together. I worried about how this might somehow reach my coworkers. Alex encouraged me to care less about hiding. He believed I was giving too much power to people who did not deserve it. He was probably right, but fear is not rational. One Saturday afternoon, Alex and I were shopping for furniture at a store near the office. We were laughing about a ridiculous couch when I saw someone from work. It was Gerald, one of the account directors who reported to Richard. He looked directly at us, at Alex's hand on my shoulder, at the obvious comfort between us. His expression changed. He nodded quickly and walked away. My stomach dropped. I knew what would happen next. By Monday morning, the energy in the office felt different. People glanced at me and then looked away. Conversations stopped when I entered the break room. Patricia called me into her office and closed the door. She asked if everything was okay. She had heard some gossip but wanted to check in directly. I told her everything was fine and tried to sound confident. She squeezed my hand and said she supported me, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Richard said nothing to me directly, but over the next few weeks, his behavior shifted. He started making comments about my clothes being too stylish or asking if I got fashion advice from someone special. During team meetings, he questioned my strategic decisions in ways he never had before. He assigned me to work with the most difficult clients and blamed me when they were unhappy. The entire department noticed. Some people seemed sympathetic but stayed silent. Others started keeping distance from me, like my identity might somehow reflect badly on them. The worst part was not the obvious hostility. It was the subtle erosion of everything I had built. My opinions carried less weight in meetings. People stopped asking for my advice. Richard began routing important decisions through other team members even when the projects were mine. I felt myself becoming invisible while still doing all the work. 3 months after Gerald saw me with Alex, an opportunity arrived that should have changed everything. A major hotel chain based in Boston wanted to launch a nationwide digital campaign targeting younger travelers. They specifically requested a marketing partner who understood social media, influencer partnerships, and authentic brand storytelling. The contract was worth $12 million over 2 years. Patricia brought me into her office to discuss leading the pitch. She believed this account could establish our company as a national player instead of a regional. But the stakes were high. The hotel chain was interviewing 5 agencies and would only choose one. Patricia wanted me to develop the entire strategy and present alongside Richard to the client's executive team. I spent 3 weeks preparing. I researched every aspect of their business, analyzed their competitors, and created a campaign concept that felt genuinely innovative. The night before the presentation, I worked until midnight perfecting the deck. Alex brought me dinner at the office and sat with me while I practiced my talking point. He could see how much this meant to me. This was my chance to prove my value in a way that Richard could not deny or diminish. If we won this account, my contribution would be undeniable. The presentation was scheduled for 10 in the morning at our office. The hotel chain sent their chief marketing officer and 2 senior vice presidents. Richard and I presented together, alternating sections of the strategy. I handled everything related to digital channels, content creation, and measurement. Richard focused on account management and budget allocation. The client asked detailed questions, and I answered every one confidently. By the end, they seemed impressed. They said they would make a decision within 2 weeks. As the clients left the conference room, Richard pulled me aside. He told me I had done adequate work, but suggested I let him handle all future communications with the client. He said they might be more comfortable dealing with someone who had more traditional business experience. I knew exactly what he meant. He was worried about them discovering I was gay. He wanted to hide me. 2 days later, the hotel chain requested a follow-up meeting. But this time, they wanted to come to our office for a full day to meet the team who would actually execute the work. This was a positive sign. Clients only did this when they were seriously considering moving forward. Patricia assembled everyone involved, about 15 people from different departments. We spent hours preparing presentations and organizing the schedule. The day of the visit, Richard gathered the senior team before the clients arrived. He went through final reminders about talking points and company values. Then he looked directly at me and said he wanted me to keep a low profile during. He suggested I stay at my desk working rather than participating in the social portions of the day. When I asked why, he said the clients were from a conservative industry and we needed to put our most mainstream people forward. Everyone in the room understood what he meant. Patricia objected immediately. She told Richard that I created the entire strategy and the clients would expect to interact with me. Richard dismissed her concern and said this was a business decision, not personal. He was protecting the company's interests. The meeting ended and everyone avoided eye contact with me. I felt humiliated and furious at the same time. I stayed at my desk during the office tour as instructed. Through the glass walls, I watched Richard introduce the clients to designers and copywriters who had barely touched the project. He showed them campaign examples I had created but presented them as team efforts. When they asked questions, other people answered using information I had provided. I was being erased. That evening, Alex found me sitting on our apartment floor surrounded by papers. I was looking through every email and document related to the hotel pitch. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was protecting myself. If this campaign succeeded, I wanted proof of my involvement. I started forwarding key files to my personal email and organizing a timeline of my contributions. Alex did not question it. He understood that survival sometimes meant preparing for the worst. Over the next few weeks, the situation deteriorated. We won the hotel account, and Richard immediately positioned himself as the sole point of contact. He restructured the project team and assigned other people to lead the execution. My role was reduced to providing technical support when needed. I was being systematically removed from my own work. The comments became more pointed. Richard started making jokes about sensitivity and modern workplace culture during department meetings. He implied that younger employees were too focused on personal identity instead of business results. Everyone knew he was talking about me. Some colleagues started avoiding me completely. Others offered quiet words of support in private but remained silent in public. The isolation was crushing. Then Richard made his biggest move. The hotel client wanted to launch a new initiative specifically targeting LGBTQ travelers for Pride Month. It was a significant opportunity to expand the campaign. Richard told Patricia he wanted someone else to lead it because he felt I might be too emotionally invested to maintain objectivity. The reasoning was absurd and insulting. Patricia pushed back hard, but Richard overruled her. He assigned the project to Gerald, the same person who had seen me with Alex and started the gossip. I realized then that Richard was not just prejudiced. He was actively working to push me out of the company. Every decision was designed to minimize my visibility and diminish my contributions. He was creating a paper trail that made me look ineffective and difficult to work with. When I tried to discuss this with Patricia, she looked exhausted. She told me she was fighting for me at every level, but Richard had political power she did not have. She advised me to focus on doing excellent work and building relationships with other departments. But I knew that was not enough. My relationship with Alex became strained. I was working constantly, trying to prove my worth through sheer effort. I came home late and distracted. We argued about my inability to set boundaries with work. Alex believed I was sacrificing too much for a company that did not value me. He wanted me to consider leaving and finding somewhere better. But I could not walk away. This felt like a fight for my dignity. The hotel campaign launched in June. The results exceeded every expectation. Website traffic increased 60%. Social media engagement was triple the industry average. Room bookings from the target demographic grew 42% in the first month. The client was ecstatic. They extended the contract for an additional year and increased the budget by 30%. Richard scheduled a company-wide meeting to celebrate the success. I sat in the back of the conference room while Richard presented metrics and campaign highlights. He used slides I had created. He referenced strategies I had developed. But my name appeared nowhere. He thanked Gerald for his leadership and praised several team members who had minimal involvement. When someone asked about the original pitch team, Richard mentioned Patricia, but conveniently forgot to include me. 40 people were in that room, and not one of them corrected him. After the meeting, Patricia cornered Richard in his office. I could not hear the conversation, but I saw her gesturing emphatically through the glass wall. Richard sat calmly behind his desk, looking unmoved. When Patricia emerged, her face was red. She told me she had demanded that Richard publicly acknowledge my contributions. He refused. He said the campaign was a team effort, and singling people out would be divisive. She apologized and said she was escalating the issue to the company president. That night, Alex and I had our worst argument. He asked how much more I could take before realizing this company would never treat me fairly. I defended my choice to stay and fight. I believed that leaving would mean they won. Alex said I was losing myself trying to prove something to people who were determined to see me as less than. He was right, but I was not ready to admit it. The situation reached a breaking point 2 weeks later. The hotel client scheduled an in-person meeting in Boston to discuss expanding the campaign nationally. It was a huge opportunity that could triple the contract value. Patricia immediately nominated me to attend because of my deep knowledge of the project. Richard rejected the idea. He said he would attend with Gerald instead. Patricia demanded an explanation. Richard said the client had specifically requested a senior presence and he felt Gerald had better rapport with their team. Patricia refused to accept it. She went directly to the company president, a man named Thomas who mostly stayed removed from day-to-day operations. She laid out everything: the marginalization, the credit stealing, the obvious discrimination. Thomas called a meeting with Richard, Patricia, and me. We sat in his office on a Friday afternoon. Patricia presented a timeline of everything that had happened over the past 6 months. She showed emails proving my contributions. She had documentation of Richard's decisions to exclude me. Richard remained calm throughout. He said Patricia was mischaracterizing normal business decisions as discrimination. He claimed his choices were based purely on what was best for client relationships and company success. He suggested that I was not being excluded because of my identity, but because I lacked the executive presence needed for high-level negotiation. Then he said something that revealed his true thinking. He mentioned that major hotel chains tend to be traditional organizations, and we needed to be strategic about who represented the company. Thomas asked what he meant by traditional. Richard stumbled through an answer about corporate culture and professional expectations, but everyone understood. Thomas concluded the meeting by saying he would review the situation and make a decision. In the meantime, Richard would attend the Boston meeting as planned. Patricia was furious. I felt defeated. We had presented clear evidence of discrimination, and nothing changed. That weekend, I barely spoke. Alex tried to comfort me, but I was beyond consolation. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office to find an email from Human Resources requesting a meeting. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. The HR director, a woman named Sarah, explained that the company was restructuring the digital department. They were eliminating several positions, including mine. She handed me a severance package and said my last day would be Friday. The decision was final and not open to discussion. I asked if this had anything to do with the meeting in Thomas's office. Sarah said the restructuring had been planned for months and the timing was coincidental. It was an obvious lie. I asked if Patricia knew. Sarah said department heads had been informed that morning. I gathered my things from the conference room and walked back to my desk in a daze. Patricia found me within minutes. She was crying. She had no advance notice and was blindsided by the decision. She believed Richard had convinced Thomas that I was a liability. She promised to fight the termination, but we both knew it was pointless. Companies always found legal ways to remove people they wanted gone. I packed my personal items into a box while colleagues pretended not to notice. No one said anything. After 3 years of working alongside these people, I left in silence. I drove home and sat in the parking lot outside our apartment for an hour. I could not face Alex yet. I felt humiliated and stupid for believing that hard work and talent would matter. When I finally went inside, Alex held me while I cried. He did not say I told you so, even though he had every right to. He just listened and reminded me that I was more than this job. Over the next few days, I processed the betrayal. But something else started happening. Anger replaced sadness. I had spent 3 years building something valuable, and they thought they could simply erase me. I started reviewing everything I had saved. All the emails, strategy documents, client communications. I had proof of my contributions to every major account. Then I remembered something important. During the hotel pitch process, the client had sent several documents directly to my personal email because I was working remotely one day. These included confidential financial projections and strategic plans they had shared only with me. I also remembered something else. 2 years earlier, when the company was struggling financially, Thomas had offered equity to several senior employees in exchange for taking reduced salaries temporarily. I was one of them. I had agreed to a 15% pay cut for 6 months in exchange for stock options. At the time, it seemed insignificant. The company was small, and the stock was nearly worthless, but we had grown substantially since then. I pulled out the paperwork and read through it carefully. I had vested shares. Not many, but enough to technically make me a minority shareholder. I called a lawyer that week. I explained the situation and asked about my options. She reviewed my employment contract and the stock option agreement. She said the termination was likely legal under Colorado law, but the pattern of discrimination might support a hostile work environment claim. However, those cases were difficult to prove and took years. Then she noticed something in the stock agreement. As a shareholder, I had the right to attend board meetings and access certain financial information. Most minority shareholders never exercised these rights, but I could. Alex came home that evening to find me researching corporate governance. He asked what I was planning. I told him I was not sure yet, but I was done being invisible. If they wanted to erase me, they would have to do it while looking directly at me. The next board meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks away. I sent a formal notice to the corporate secretary informing them of my intention to attend. The corporate secretary called me 2 days after receiving my notice. She sounded confused. She explained that board meetings were typically only attended by directors and executive leadership. I calmly referenced the section of the stock agreement that guaranteed shareholder attendance rights. She said she would need to verify with a company lawyer. I told her to take her time, but that I would be exercising my legal right. Richard called me the next day. His tone was friendlier than it had been in months. He suggested that attending the board meeting was unnecessary and might be uncomfortable for everyone. He offered to meet with me privately to discuss any concerns. I declined politely. I said I was simply interested in understanding how the company I partially owned was being managed. He said he understood, but hoped I would reconsider. I did not respond. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 9. I arrived at the office building at 8:45 wearing my best suit. Security initially refused to let me enter because I no longer had an employee badge. I showed them my shareholder documentation and the secretary's reluctant confirmation email. They made several calls before finally allowing me upstairs. The boardroom was on the 16th floor, a space I had never entered during my employment. Large windows, expensive furniture, and a long mahogany table. 6 board members were already seated along with Thomas Richard and the chief financial officer. They stopped talking when I entered. Thomas greeted me stiffly and indicated a chair against the wall, separate from the main table. I sat down and took out a notebook. The meeting proceeded normally at first. They discussed quarterly financials, operational challenges, and strategic priorities. I listened carefully and took notes. Then they reached the section about major accounts. Richard presented an update on the hotel campaign. He described it as his signature achievement and outlined plans for national expansion. He projected the contract would generate $18 million over the next 3 years. The board members asked questions about sustainability and risk factors. Richard answered confidently. I raised my hand. The room went silent. Thomas reluctantly acknowledged me. I asked if Richard could clarify his specific contributions to the hotel campaign strategy. Richard looked irritated. He said he had overseen the entire project from pitch to execution. I asked if he had developed the digital strategy, created the content framework, or built the measurement systems. He said those were team efforts. I smiled and said I had documentation showing otherwise. I pulled out printed emails and strategy documents. I walked to the main table and distributed copies to each board member. These showed clearly that I had created every aspect of the campaign while Richard had minimal involvement. The board members read through the pages. One of them, a woman named Dr. Reeves, asked Richard to explain the discrepancy. Richard said I was overemphasizing my role and taking credit for collaborative work. I then produced the emails from the hotel client. These were messages they had sent directly to me discussing strategy, expressing enthusiasm for my ideas, and thanking me specifically for my insights. Several emails mentioned speaking with me about aspects of the campaign they found innovative. Dr. Reeves asked why these communications had gone to me rather than Richard if he was the account lead. Richard had no good answer. Thomas tried to move on to other agenda items, but I was not finished. I mentioned that I found it interesting the company had terminated my employment 1 week after I presented evidence of discrimination. I referenced the meeting in Thomas's office and Patricia's documentation. I said it seemed like retaliation, which generally created significant legal exposure for companies. The board members looked at Thomas and Richard with new skepticism. Then I mentioned something else I had discovered. While reviewing company financials available to shareholders, I noticed several unusual payments to a consulting firm. I had researched the firm and found it was owned by Richard's brother-in-law. Over the past 2 years, the company had paid this firm over $400,000 for services that were poorly documented. I asked if the board was aware of this relationship and whether proper conflict of interest protocols had been followed. Thomas went pale. The CFO started flipping through documents frantically. Dr. Reeves asked me to provide the documentation for these payments. I had printed everything. The board members passed the papers around. The consulting firm had been paid for vague services like strategic advising and market research. But there was no evidence these services had been delivered. Richard had approved all the payments. One board member asked Richard directly about his relationship to the consulting firm owner. Richard admitted they were related, but said the firm provided legitimate services. Dr. Reeves asked for examples of deliverables. Richard struggled to name any. The CFO said he would need to conduct an internal audit. Thomas suggested moving into executive session without Richard present. Richard's face turned red, but he left the room. I was asked to leave as well since executive session was only for board members. As I stood to go, Dr. Reeves thanked me for bringing these issues to their attention. She said the board took fiduciary responsibility seriously and would investigate thoroughly. I walked out of the building feeling lighter than I had in months. Patricia called me that afternoon. She had heard about the board meeting through office gossip. She said Richard had returned from the meeting furious and had been called into Thomas's office immediately. She had no details, but the executive floor was in chaos. I told her what happened. She laughed for the first time in weeks and said I was brilliant. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation unraveled for Richard. The board launched a formal investigation into the consulting firm payments. They discovered that not only had services not been delivered, but the firm had essentially been a way for Richard to funnel money to family. The total amount over 5 years exceeded $1 million. The board also reviewed my termination and found the timing and circumstances problematic. They interviewed Patricia and several other employees who confirmed the pattern of discrimination. Richard was terminated for cause. The announcement went out company-wide. Thomas sent a separate email stating that the company was committed to fostering an inclusive workplace and had zero tolerance for discrimination. It was corporate language, but the message was clear. The board also voted to offer me reinstatement with a promotion to Patricia's level and a formal apology. Additionally, they offered a settlement payment to compensate for the hostile work environment and wrongful termination. I considered the offer carefully. Part of me wanted to return and prove myself in the role I deserved. But another part knew I could never fully trust that environment again. I negotiated a better settlement that included keeping my vested shares as the company continued growing. I declined reinstatement, but agreed to consult on the hotel campaign transition to ensure continuity. The hotel client learned about the situation through industry connections. They reached out to me directly. They said they had always believed I was the driving force behind the campaign's success and asked if I would be interested in working with them independently. They wanted to bring their marketing in-house and needed someone to build the department. The compensation was significantly better than what I had earned at Beacon Media Group, and I would have full creative control. I accepted their offer. Within a month, I was leading a team of 12 people and reporting directly to the chief marketing officer. The work was challenging but rewarding. More importantly, I was working in an environment where my identity was not an issue. Several executives at the hotel chain were openly LGBTQ, and the company had strong non-discrimination policies backed by real action. 6 months later, I heard that Beacon Media Group had lost 3 major clients after Richard's termination became public. The consulting firm scandal had damaged their reputation in the industry. Patricia left to start her own agency and took several talented people with her. Thomas remained as president, but the company was struggling financially. My shares, ironically, had decreased in value. But I did not care about that anymore. I think about that board meeting sometimes. The look on Richard's face when I distributed those documents. The way the room shifted as board members realized what had been happening. For 3 years, I had been fighting to be seen and valued in a place that was determined to diminish me. I thought if I worked hard enough and proved myself thoroughly enough, prejudice would not matter. I was wrong about that. But I learned something more important. Silence and acceptance do not protect you from discrimination. They just make you smaller. When I finally stood up, not by shouting or demanding, but by calmly presenting facts and exercising rights I had earned, everything changed. Richard had counted on me disappearing quietly. Most people in my situation do. The system is designed to make fighting back exhausting and futile. What saved me was not luck. It was preparation and strategy. I had documented everything because some part of me always knew I might need proof. I had kept copies of my work because I understood my contributions might be erased. I had read my stock agreement carefully when others might have ignored it. These small acts of self-protection became the foundation of my vindication. I also learned about the cost of hiding. For years, I had kept my identity separate from my professional life, believing that invisibility was safety. But that separation required constant energy and created constant fear. Living authentically, even when it made me vulnerable to prejudice, ultimately gave me more power than hiding ever did. People like Richard rely on shame and silence. Taking those weapons away from them changes the entire dynamic. My relationship with Alex survived, though it was tested. He saw me at my lowest and never wavered in his support. We are still together, still building a life where we do not have to separate who we are from what we do. That integration feels like its own kind of success. The prejudice I faced was not unique or even unusual. Countless LGBT people navigate similar situations every day in offices, agencies, firms, and companies across every industry. Many stay silent because the risk of speaking up feels too great. Some fight and lose. Others leave and start over somewhere else. There is no single right response. But I want people to know that fighting back is possible. Winning is possible. Not through anger or confrontation necessarily, but through preparation, documentation, and strategic use of whatever power you have. I own my story now in a way I did not before. Richard tried to write me out of my own achievements. The company tried to make me disappear. But I am still here, doing work that matters, leading teams, building campaigns that win awards. I am also openly gay in every part of my life, including professionally. That visibility is its own form of resistance. Every day I show up as myself, I am proving that people like Richard were wrong about what we can achieve. If my story inspired you, if you have ever felt diminished or know someone who has, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we share real stories of overcoming and resistance. And if you have your own story of triumph against prejudice, share it in the comments. Your experience can inspire someone going through a similar situation. Remember, your value is not defined by others' prejudice. Your talent is greater than any barrier they try to put in your way. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being who you are without apologizing. See you in the next story, which will be even more impactful.